Hey there, this is Phil. Welcome back to the show. This is the Holy Post podcast. This is 2021 as you're listening to this. Is that correct, Skye?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And we are here with a special guest for the whole episode, John Fea, our friend, official historian of the Holy Post podcast. Hi, John.
Good to be with you guys. Can I put that on my my Vita?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll add that on. Yeah.
That'll open many doors.
And close many others. We both want to have Beth Moore on the show, and I was talking with my friend Ed Stetzer about, hey, Beth, can you get her? And he said if she asked me, I would probably advise her against it.
Oh my gosh, that's not fair because she's willing to step into some controversial
She's
stuff.
Mixing it up. Yeah, I think he just thought he has deep, intimate internal knowledge of the SBC, and I think he was just worried that it would make her life harder, not easier, not knowing what topics we would end up talking. And I think we would, Beth, if you're listening, we would try to keep you out of trouble if you came on the show. As long as John wasn't on the show at the same time, because then that would be it. It'd be
I'd love to talk to Beth Moore. I'd love to sit down with her for an hour and chat.
That would be fun. Okay, here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. So, Skye, you went skiing like yesterday.
Yeah, if you can call anything in the Illinois-Wisconsin region true skiing. But we tried.
Yeah, you left Illinois, right?
Yeah, in fact, one of the runs of the ski resort goes right along the state line between Illinois and Wisconsin.
Really?
So,
where were you?
Wilmot Mountain. I've never been there.
Yeah, mountain. We throw the term mountain around a little too freely. There's like one. There's have you ever skied at Sundown?
No.
Or Chestnut. The Chestnut is in Illinois. Sundown is on the opposite side of the Mississippi River in Dubuque, and those take advantage of the Mississippi River bluffs for change in elevation, because we don't have nothing else in Illinois changes the elevation of the land other than the Mississippi River.
Hey, since we have a historian on the podcast today,
yeah.
you want to know a little bit of Illinois/Chicago history that relates to this?
John, tell us the history of the Mississippi River.
So, no, but here, this is true. I looked this up one time. I was curious because there's a bunch of suburbs all around Chicago that have some kind of elevation in their name, like Arlington Heights and Mount Prospect and
that's right,
Vernon Hills and all that. Turns out that Chicago is notorious for flooding. It was built on like swampland. So following World War II, when there were all these kind of developers creating new towns and suburbs around Chicago, they were trying to attract people to these outskirt areas, and they named them with high elevation names under the illusion that if we move to Arlington Heights, we're not going to flood because it must be higher than Chicago is. And of course, none of that's true. There's flooding all over the Chicago region, and all these names are just marketing.
So Mount Prospect, there is zero elevational change to justify the name Mount Prospect.
That's right. Yeah.
I used to live in Highland Park.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's called Highland Park because everyone there is very rich. They're high on the social ladder.
I was a member of the service community back then.
Okay. So why did we, Skye, why did we invite John to be on the show today?
Well,
what are we talking about?
As the official Holy Post historian, we thought we've just come out of one of the craziest years any of us have ever lived through, and we need some perspective. And John has been a great conversation partner on a number of different issues that are all going to intersect with 2020. So I thought what a great way to start 2021 by having somebody with perspective look back on 2020.
So, I see.
John, we're looking to you for all the answers and to make sense of what we've just all experienced.
You realize that I need a good 20 years to be able to actually say anything intelligent about 2020 from a historical perspective, right? But I'm willing to go for it.
Okay, good.
Clearly,
well, and then 20 years we'll correct you.
You're not ready for the social media era if you need to reflect before you speak.
Exactly.
Before we do that, everybody has to say, what was your favorite Christmas gift you got this year? Skye, what was your favorite Christmas gift?
My wife got me Barack Obama's new book, Promised Land, which I've just started reading, and that's a close tie with what my kids got me, which was this Mandalorian bobblehead. With Baby Yoda
strapped to the front of him,
and he's got a jetpack on the back.
Oh, and the jetpack is flaming. Oh,
that's great. So,
wow, I don't know how he doesn't set his boots on fire every time he flies off somewhere. That confuses me. Okay, those are nice gifts. Jason, what'd you get?
I got an Apple Watch.
Did you?
Yeah, I love it. I've closed my rings every day since.
Yeah, and you do that just by wiggling your arm in the air?
Yeah, pretty much just all day.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, he's definitely run a marathon by now with all that wiggling. Okay, that's cool. John, okay, what'd you get?
This might take a little explanation, but during the pandemic, I got hooked on Chris Cuomo primetime on CNN when he was going through the COVID. I was checking in on him every day to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And my daughter, wise guy that she is, bought me a Cuomo primetime baseball cap. Yeah, I got some other nice gifts too, but
okay,
that one was the most original.
And are there any social settings where you will not wear that?
Yeah, probably most of them.
Okay. My favorite Christmas present was actually one that I picked out. Is that ever the case for you guys, that you say, this is what I really want, I've already picked it out, let's just say that we're all giving it to me? You admit it. Yeah, when you're a grown up. Yeah. I got a new ukulele.
No.
I got a new ukulele, and it's actually a nice ukulele.
Plinky Pete wasn't nice?
Plinky Pete was nice in personality, not in construction, which is true for a lot of my friends.
So what are you going to do with it, Phil?
Play it. Not necessarily live on. Well, sometimes I'll probably play it in the live cast that we're doing tonight, although by the time you listen to this, it's already over, so you missed it. But it's electrified, so you can plug it in. It has a built-in tuner, so it's more like a decent guitar. But I didn't even know they made nice ukuleles. I thought ukuleles were just a thing that they made with the quality that you would exchange them for tokens at an arcade, at the counter after you won a whole bunch of tickets.
Now you're insulting Hawaiian culture.
They make really nice ukuleles, and I have never played one. And it's like, wow, I love this ukulele.
Have you given this one a name? Like Electric Enrique or something? What are you going to call him?
No, it does not have a name yet. Plinky Pete was such a great ukulele name that we'll have to do something with the audience, and they can name the new ukulele. Do you know my great aunt was named by a radio audience? What? My great aunt Jean. My great grandfather, when he was a radio preacher, they had their second child, I forget, and they decided to let the radio audience name her. So they had a write-in contest to name R.R. Brown's daughter.
What did they raise money this way? Was it like whoever gives the most money gets to name the daughter kind of thing?
I don't
Put
have
your name on
details.
An academic building?
I know there were no academic buildings. They didn't have them yet. They hadn't been invented. I don't know how it happened. It would have been the late 1920s. Yeah, I believe. And so
I guess I shouldn't say anything because I asked my Twitter audience to name my new dog.
That's right. That's right. And you refused to take my suggestion,
or theirs, honestly.
Really? Oh, yeah. So you just made a mockery of the whole process.
I kind of did, yeah.
That's great. Just like American democracy. Okay.
Speaking of.
Yeah, speaking of.
John, okay, there's a number of different things we're going to talk about this hour, but let's start with the fact that I think the first time you came on the show is to talk about your book, Believe Me, in which you explained, and I thought better than anyone else I had encountered, you helped explain why so many evangelicals supported Donald Trump in 2016. You offered perspective and insight in historical context for all that. So where I want to begin is, given the election that we've just come through in 2020, what did 2020 do to change or confirm your understanding of evangelicals and politics from 4 years ago?
I think very little. I think, I don't mean to sound, kind of arrogant or whatever, but I think the three major themes that I focused on in that book, evangelical politics is driven by fear, the pursuit of power, and what was the third one again? Now nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
Nostalgia for a kind of golden age of Christian America. I think the deeper you went into the Trump presidency, I think I think a lot of those things were confirmed. It's interesting. I went on the Goodreads site for the book the other night. I stopped reading it after a while because everybody was, when you write a book about Trump, like, people don't evaluate the merits of the argument. Like, they either love it or they hate it, right? There's
right.
I'm a diehard Trump supporter, but Fea gets it right. Like, I wish someone would just say that. Yes, this is exactly why I voted for Trump, but they see it as an attack. But it's funny, the last 20 or 25 reviews on Goodreads, I'm like, my chest is getting out a little bit. I'm saying, like, wow, like, people are saying this makes perfect sense now. And I think especially the post-election kind of clinging to the election fraud and all of that, I think really kind of solidifies in some way the thesis that I laid out. And I feel embarrassed kind of framing it that way. But I don't know. I think I may have gotten it right.
Did you ever think, following 2016, that the fever would break, that there would be something that caused more evangelicals to decide we're going in the wrong direction? Because 2020 feels like it was a double or tripling down on what happened in 2016. And even now, post-election, people are not breaking from their commitment to this theory that he's God's chosen leader.
Yeah. As soon as Trump started fulfilling his promises to the white evangelical community, put the embassy in Jerusalem, made the Supreme Court appointments, right? Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, began at least giving lip service to these questions of religious liberty, right? I mean, most evangelicals believe that Trump overturned and ended the Johnson Amendment, right? This tax code that doesn't allow preachers to endorse kids. He didn't, right? But most evangelicals don't realize that, right? As soon as he started delivering on these things, I knew there wasn't going to be, much of a shift or a change in evangelical support. And in fact, you have prominent leaders, I think Al Mohler being the most significant, who actually flipped, right? He said, I didn't, maybe not halfway flipped, right? I didn't vote for either candidate in 2016, but I'm voting for Trump in 2020. And I think you saw more and more people doing that because he did deliver on what he promised.
So you coined the term court evangelicals, and you use it a lot in your social media posts and in your blogs. These are evangelical leaders who have fully endorsed Donald Trump. They're frequently seen with him or at his rallies or at the White House. We talked a few weeks ago about the Jericho March that happened in D.C. a few weeks back, and it was kind of conspicuous that a lot of those court evangelicals weren't there. So you kind of keep an eye on that crew. What's going on now that it looks pretty definitive that there isn't going to be some kind of miracle that overturns the election results? Where are they in their Trump orbit?
Yeah, I wrote a post on this. Well, in one of my kind of regular updates on these court evangelicals, I noticed the same thing. If you think about that Jericho March, probably Eric Metaxas, I would say, would be the only person. I have to go look back at the roster, but the most prominent of these so-called court evangelicals, it was Eric Metaxas. Your Robert Jeffresses, your Franklin Grahams. I was kind of surprised Paula White wasn't there. Maybe she had a scheduling conflict or something on that day. I don't know. some of your old school Christian right, 60 plus in age, 70 plus in age, your people who came of age under Falwell really, are concerned about gaining political power, abortion, and so forth. That Jericho March, I'm not sure even how to describe it. I mean, it was this kind of Pentecostal. In my book, and believe me, I talk about this group. I didn't coin this term, but these independent network charismatics. These are people that do not many evangelicals kind of who were, pastors who went to like Fuller Seminary or Trinity Evangelical Divinity School or Southern Baptist Seminary or Gordon Conwell or, these kinds of like mainstream or Billy Graham followers. There's a whole group out there. They have massive numbers of followers. There's a guy who appeared at that Jericho march. His name is Lance Wallnow. The only people who know about this guy are like the right-wing watch people, who they keep track of him. He's not a mainstream name.
I've watched a couple of his videos, and
yeah, they're crazy.
These are bizarre people.
Yeah, and he is. If you go on his Facebook page and watch one of his videos, just look at the numbers. He literally gets 250 to 300,000 likes every time he appears for and he's very long-winded. He'll talk, he's very hard to watch because he says the same thing over and over and over again for 45 minutes, which he could do it in 5, right? But he, you're talking about 250,000 people tuning in on like a rant. He gets on at midnight and starts riffing on, how God told him that Trump won. This is a significant portion of these evangelical voters. I think most of these people are people who follow Wallnow are kind of uneducated. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but they just have never been trained to sort of think theologically about things. They are very pietistic, they feel that, God is speaking to them in various ways. And, I always looked at Eric Metaxas as a kind of guy who was like I don't know, most academics would bristle at the idea of calling him a Christian intellectual, like he's no Mark Knoll or Richard Mao or, George Marsden,
but he was he was introducing those people on stage at Socrates in the City. He was introducing John Lennox. He was talking to all the right people. He was connecting with Os Guinness. They were good friends. Yep. So I think what confused me about Eric is that he went from, hobnobbing with John Lennox to hobnobbing with Tucker Carlson. And I don't understand what happened there, because it took a big chunk, not that Eric took a big chunk of evangelicalism with him, but a big chunk of evangelicalism either was never with the Os Guinnesses of, and the more educated side of intellectualism, or just suddenly found, when did we lose half of the church from following people that actually went to seminary?
Yeah, and you know what? I've been doing a little research lately in a lot of these kind of small congregations around the country, and a lot of these pastors are now no longer going to like the mainstream seminaries that we would think of, like in the going to your recent video, right? The sort of post NAE era, right? They're not going to Fuller, like I named them before, Trinity, or they're these creations. There's these seminaries that let's just take Calvary Chapel, right? Which, founded by Chuck Smith, this huge thing. And I'm not judging them as part of this. Calvary Chapel is a pretty interesting mix. You have very pro-Trump people like Jack Hibbs out there in California, who is a diehard Trumper, but you also have anti-Trumpers. Greg Laurie is part of this movement. I was doing some research on Calvary Chapel the other day, and I must have looked at about 100 web pages from Calvary Chapel churches looking at their pastors, right? And I'd say about 75% of them went to some place called Calvary Chapel Bible Institute, or Calvary Chapel Seminary. So I think you no longer have these big institutions that attract large numbers of diverse people. When I went to Trinity Seminary in the early 1990s, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School.
I'm a grad.
Yeah, I mean, I have an MDiv and a Master's of Arts in Church History. I could take a course in the morning with D.A. Carson and then take a course in the afternoon with Scott McKnight when he was there, who's kind of this Anabaptist evangelical, right? Who was always pushing the limits of kind of biblical inerrancy and so forth. I hope Scott doesn't hear me say that, but I think he would agree, and then I take Grant Osborne, this kind of Arminian, there even were Lutherans, of all people on the faculty. Today, I see, like, if you go to Southern Baptist Seminary where Al Mohler presides, if you're not part of this sort of neo-Calvinist movement, I mean, you're not kind of welcome on the faculty. Right. And this is another split within the Southern Baptist Convention, because if you go to Southwestern, that's the more Arminian kind of, free will gospel branch of this. It's so there's no longer these different theological traditions talking to one another. What I was going to say about Metaxas was, I guess I didn't realize just how deep Metaxas was into this kind of Pentecostal charismatic movement. I remember listening to his radio program 3 or 4 years ago, and he mentioned that he was preaching at Times Square Church in New York City, which is David Wilkerson. Some of your listeners may know him, the Cross and the Switchblade. Uh-huh. He's the one who led Nicky Cruz to the Lord.
And I read the comic book when I was 8.
Is that right?
Yeah. There was a comic book.
That is a huge kind of charismatic Pentecostal healing, the whole thing. My brother used to attend that church. I grew up right across the river in New Jersey. And for Metaxas to be preaching there, I kind of said, that's kind of odd. I didn't think Metaxas kind of ran with that group. But I think he does. He's on these prayer calls with Jim Garlow.
I think his politics
is on them,
Yeah, I think his politics got him there, not his theology.
I think you're right.
So one of the first times I met Eric, I was preaching at his church in Manhattan at the time, which was a Presbyterian church. I think I was there for the 150th anniversary. I was the guest speaker.
That would make sense to me. Presbyterian. Right. Did he go to Redeemer at some point? I would imagine he would have.
And I met Eric, and here he is. He's this Manhattan intellectual. He went to Yale. Like, he just had all these kind of East Coast credentials, and I assumed that he skewed a bit more progressive in his social views or politics, and found out no, it was precisely the opposite. And even based on his congregation, I would assume that. But no, I mean, he's very hardcore the other direction.
He came to Messiah College. He came to Messiah College right when the Bonhoeffer book came out, and just lit the place on fire. His humor, his preaching, and he was invited by our honors college director, who just assumed he was part of this kind of PCA, kind of reformed intellectual kind of crowd.
Yeah, well, the guy at John Brown that invited him for the debate with David French, if you listen to that debate, mm-hmm. I remember the guy who invited him tweeting very confusedly about a month later about some of the wacko stuff Eric was engaging in then. So he didn't have a good assessment of how far into Newsmax territory Eric had already moved before he invited him to come and debate David French on Trumpism at John Brown. And then after the fact went, oh, wait, what just happened to Eric in the last 2 weeks?
Someone should do a study of his show and just see the kind of guests over the last...
Yeah.
The show hasn't been on. I don't know if there's even was a show before he made the turn. I mean, maybe compare Socrates in the City with the radio show.
Yeah, right. He's had a radio show for 4 or 5 years max, and then and TBN gave him the TV version of it and paid for his studio in New York, and is now kind of underwriting him. So it's a big mess. Every
now and then, the other day he had on this fairly noted, respectable, popular historian H.W. Brands, who writes these books about Lincoln and And I'm like, this is the old Eric. Somehow H.W. Brand snuck in.
Right.
And I'm thinking, Does H.W. Brands even have any idea what kind of show he's on right now? Did his publicist just, put him on?
Right. Why do you think Robert Jeffress and Pat Robertson, of all people, have peeled away and said, this is over? And Pat Robertson, predicted, God has told me that Trump is going to win. And now he's saying, give it up. It's over. Let it go. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I hope I don't come across too uncharitable here to Pat Robertson, but Pat Robertson, the media made it. I mean, CNN was running like 3-4 minute stories on Pat Robertson when he said told Trump to give it up, and I was kind of thinking like, no one cares. You know what I mean? Like Pat Robertson is no longer the voice, for this.
Right.
No one's listening. Whatever he says, people like to sort of make fun of his crazy prophecies and so forth. We hosted our. I'm not going to tell you how it came about this way, but we hosted our annual conference on faith and history for Christian historians at Regent a couple years ago. And a very good historian of the religious right named David Swartz, a friend of mine, decided he was going to come a couple days early and sit in on the 700 Club filming, right? The studio audience. He was the only one in the studio audience, right? I mean, this guy has lost much of his.
They don't do a studio audience anymore. I was on the 700 Club a few months ago, and it was a family and 2 other people in the studio audience, and they were encouraged not to make any noise, because if they make noise, you realize that there's only 5 people sitting back there. So the studio audience has kind of gone the way of the dodo.
I think Pat Robertson, he's, as much as he comes across as this kind of Pentecostal who makes these crazy prophecies, there's also a part of Pat Robertson who is like was a legitimate kind of GOP politician. I mean, this guy didn't he win or come in second in the New Hampshire primary in 1988?
Yeah.
I mean, he knows politics. He's been on the inside of the GOP, and there's something, there's a certain part of him that has that kind of traditionalism, that sort of Mitt Romney kind of like, this is not my party, kind of thing. So maybe that has something to do with the change. Jeffress, there's Richard Land, the former director. He had a Russell Moore's job before Russell Moore. What is director of ERLC or something?
Yeah,
whatever. Richard Land had one of the. Again, I hate. Maybe we could cut this if it comes across too bad. But he had one of the funniest lines where he said, like, the most dangerous place in Southern Baptist life is between Robert Jeffress and a television camera. And it was. I say it because it was one Southern Baptist like criticizing another Southern Baptist, right? And Jeffress, I think. On the other hand, he's just he's a traditionalist too. I mean, he got on the Trump bandwagon, right? He got what he wanted. I think there was ever a contractual person, it was Jeffress, right? And I think Jeffress, with his kind of, he's not a Pentecostal. God didn't tell him, that Trump won. I mean, I just think he saw the evidence, and he's a somewhat rational guy. Right?
I think you put your finger on it, though, John. There is a contract here between a Trump and a lot of these evangelical leaders, and it was transactional. And when the transaction was over, they left. It wasn't like there was a deep loyalty or a deep sense of calling or mission or prophecy like some of the Pentecostal leaders may have had. And they've fled. They've jumped ship, as any transactional relationship would. Okay, let's talk about this for a second, though. Would you have predicted we'd get to this place based on the trajectory of the religious right and what happened in the past and then in 2016, that we would land at a place where evangelicals are now broadly identified with not just the religious right or the GOP, but with the most extreme, corrupt, immoral person who's probably ever occupied the White House, And how do we shed that? Is it even possible, or is it baked in? Is it done for a generation?
I think the first thing I learned, one of the lessons that I learned from writing Believe Me and the criticism I received from the book, I expected the criticism from the kind of pro-Trump, evangelicals. The criticism I received, though, from the evangelicals who, A, held their nose and voted for Trump, and B, who didn't vote for Trump but thought I was being unfair to those who did, right? That made me think about the diversity of that 81%. I think as a historian, and as we think about the way historians are going to unpack this, a good historian, to me, it seems like, will notice that when you just throw around evangelicals are, X, Y, and Z, it's problematic. And there's much more nuance and complexity there. But what I think what we saw, I like to think of it, I've been playing around with this word lately. I've been thinking about it as a kind of unveiling, right? The uniqueness of the 2020, and all of it is somehow related to Trump, but the three things, right? Trump's presidency, period, right? COVID and race, right? The racial conflicts in America have unveiled things. So you I'm sure you've talked to these people who have friends who are evangelicals who say, I just cleared this with my wife before I came on to see if she felt this way, right? They say, I never knew that. I've known this person my whole life, and the things they're writing on Facebook, or, I never knew that side of them. I didn't know this is what they really believed, right? I think Trump kind of lifted the veil. 2020 lifted the veil up. And what we found was not only among ordinary people like my wife's friends or whoever, but from our leaders, the evangelical leaders too. And I think what it unveiled was, I think Trump unveiled, and this is over the last 4 years, not just 2020, but I think Trump unveiled just how deep and how successful the Christian right vision of politics has become. I mean, I think Jerry Falwell Sr., I've said this before, I maybe even said it on this show. I got like a paragraph on him in my U.S. History Survey textbook. This guy might deserve a whole chapter. He's taught millions of evangelicals that there's only one way of doing Christian politics.
Right.
So I think that was unveiled by Trump. I think a long-standing kind of subtle racism, or at least an unwillingness to deal with race that I argued in Believe Me has been around for 200 years in evangelicalism, surfaced. We saw it raw, right? For the first time in 2020 in the wake of the George Floyd and the battle over CRT, critical race theory, and so forth. And then I think COVID revealed a deeply embedded Christian nationalism. This idea that Thomas Jefferson said we're endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, right? That's Thomas Jefferson who said that, right? But you hear these evangelicals who quote it as if it's a scripture, right? So this idea that our rights, whatever they are, we've seen it most clearly, I think, in the COVID crisis, that our right to wear a mask or not to wear a mask trumps neighbor love, or loving people around us, caring for those who are sick. I think 2020 just lifted the lid on all of that, and we got to see some of the dark points of American evangelicals. And at the same time, I think, to be fair, we also realize that there are others who have been staying the course, right, in a good way, right?
Mm-hmm. Did you read Rick Warren's interview about what they were doing with Saddleback?
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, where's this voice been?
Right.
Why did someone have to go track him down and say, tell us how you've been approaching it?
And why did it end up relevant and not on CNN or the New York Times or Washington Post? Because they'll spend every hour repeating the video of oh gosh, I'm blanking. The 700 Club guy,
The 700 Club guy.
You know what I'm talking about? We were just talking about him.
Robertson.
Robertson. They'll recycle his video over and over and over again, but Rick Warren is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, Rick Warren, if you guys at home didn't read the interview in Relevant, they just asked him his approach on COVID, and it was completely biblical. It says we're not being persecuted. We're being treated the same way as movie theaters and live, theaters and music venues. And that's not about the gathering. We're doing church more now than we were before when we could meet together. And here's how many people we've fed in the last, 6 months. Here's how many meals a week we're handing out. And it was, dare I say, downright inspiring to say, yeah, I think that's what evangelicalism, activism, care for others was supposed to look like. I'm shocked that it was so shocking to read it.
That's why I think the 81%, which we all jumped all over early in the Trump presidency, we need to be a little bit careful. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, 81% of white evangelicals empowered this man. Empowered the man who is right now trying to undermine our democracy, waiting till it's too late to pass the stimulus, right? On the other hand, I mean, there are people who I am listening to pastors right now who voted for Trump, who are singing the praises of that Rick Warren piece.
So, but John, you see what I'm saying? Yeah, but so John, explain this though. You're right. 81% 4 years ago of white evangelicals empowered Donald Trump, but based on exit polling we've seen from 2020, it doesn't look like that number really changed much.
Yeah.
So after 4 years of seeing everything that this guy did or didn't do or said or didn't say, they still are for him. So what does that mean?
Well, I think you can be for Trump in different ways. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing those people who liked what Rick Warren said, but did not that voted for Trump and also liked what Rick Warren said are not going to MAGA rallies. They don't have the red hat on, right? They just could not vote. And this is the influence of the Christian right. They just couldn't bring themselves to vote for someone who was pro-choice.
Well, what about the many, I'm thinking of David French again, but the many principled evangelicals who said, I can't vote for a pro-choice candidate like Biden, but it doesn't mean that I have to vote for Trump either. Like there wasn't that message. Like there were not more people who sat home and said, forget it, pox on both your houses. I'm not voting.
John Piper, who did it kind of subtly without saying anything. Right. But everyone was kind of read between the lines. You know exactly what he was saying.
Yeah. So there wasn't a diminishment of enthusiasm that I expected. Honestly, I thought there were going to be more white evangelicals who after 4 years were just saying, hey, I gave him a chance last time. I'm not doing it again. But it doesn't seem that's what happened.
Well, you could talk as much as you could talk a lot about social media and Fox News, cable news, Newsmax, whatever, but they have done an incredible job of convincing ordinary people that number one, not just you still hear the Biden baby killer thing, right? But Biden socialist. Mm-hmm. Right. This, I mean, just listen to Metaxas, the Republic is over. If this moderate Democrat, Roman Catholic, Joe Biden gets elected, the Republic is over. We're not talking about AOC here. And even then I would say the Republic's not over. Right?
So, okay. But that brings up the point. What happens in 4 years when America is still here? And these voices like Metaxas and others have been, flamethrowers saying it's all coming to an end, and it doesn't. I mean, the Bible has a thing or two to say about false prophets, but to be fair, they did this to Obama back in 2008 and 2012, and yet America survived, and they're still doing it. It makes me wonder how often can they play that tactic and not get called on it?
Skye, you're assuming that America will still be here in 4 years.
I am assuming,
You're starting with a big assumption.
Well, then forget that, and I'll say there was all the hysteria in 2008 at Obama's presidency saying America was going to end, and it did survive his administration. So what happens? Is there anything that you think will eventually derail the religious right and its grip on so much of white evangelicalism, or is this just are they inseparable at this point?
I mean, I'm not, obviously I go the other way, right? I go to the past, not,
and we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, I don't go to the future. But let me give it a shot. I hope, right? Again, I've always, none of us know, obviously, but yeah, I hope time. I think the generation that was schooled under the Christian right, moral majority vision of politics, the average Trump voter was 57 years old. I'm guessing the average evangelical Trump voter was somewhere in that range too, right? I mean, I got a 19 and a 23-year-old daughter, right? Who both go to a Christian university, both were raised in an evangelical free church youth group, the whole culture, right? They're having none of this. They both vote. Maybe I shouldn't call them out for this, but I think most of their friends know that they both voted for Joe Biden, right? They couldn't even imagine a scenario in which they voted for Donald Trump. It wasn't even, and I think the more I hear from young people, I think that may be our hope. Now, having said that, again, it gets complicated. As a historian, I remember all of these books in like the 1970s, like the young evangelicals, like the next evangelicals, right? And all these people in like 1990 are voting, 2000 are voting for, GOP Christian right candidates. So you never know what happened. People tend to get more conservative as they get older, but I think that's our best hope. I think a lot of the young people are just fed up. I mean, our at Messiah College now, we're an Anabaptist school, so we kind of reject a lot of things that other Christian right colleges like Liberty or something would, But our we don't even have a Republican student group. We have a conservative student group, and they flat out rejected Trump. And we have a very robust Democratic group too. So it's, I don't know.
Basically wait for this generation to run its course, and then we'll see things realign.
Maybe. I mean, but then you got people like Charlie Kirk running around,
right.
Rallying the troops, I don't know.
Shooting money cannons at them.
Yeah. All right, then let's in the remaining time we have, let's look backwards, since that's where you're more comfortable anyway. Last month, back in December, Phil released the latest Holy Post video, which was a history of evangelicalism, trying to explain where this thing came from and differentiate it from fundamentalism. And you were a sounding board for that stuff. And, it's a 20-minute video, right, Phil?
22 minutes.
So there has to...
Actually, I got an email, not to interrupt, but I got an email from a pastor who said to me, "Are you the same John Fea who's in the credits?" I didn't even know I was in the credits. It's great.
Anyway, Holy Post opens doors.
And was he angry or complimentary?
No. He just was like, he wanted to ask a couple more questions. I'm like, well, why did you get up with Skye and Phil?
So obviously we recommend everybody to go on YouTube or go to holypost.com and watch that video, because you'll find it very educational. But John, when you reviewed the first draft of it, you acknowledged that you can't squeeze all of the nuances of history into a 20-minute video, right? There's certain things just for the sake of time have to be cut out. So what pieces do you think, if you were making the video, you would want to reincorporate or emphasize or basically, I want you to pick apart Phil's video a little bit.
I'll tell you which one he asked if I would add, and I didn't have time to add, because that was one that was big to him, was the second Great Awakening, because I touched on the first Great Awakening, and then I went straight to the modernist fundamentalist controversy, and he felt that was an oversight. So
you had Whitefield, but you didn't do Finney, basically.
Yeah. So what did we miss out on by not landing the plane briefly there?
Well, the second Great Awakening, I think, is essential, because I think that is really the first time where you see evangelicalism becoming so wedded to kind of American democracy, American nationalism, right? I mean, and there's two sides of the Second Great Awakening. A lot on the evangelical left today, your Jim Wallaces of the world, your Randy Ballmers, your Ron Siders, right? They will always appeal to like this golden age of the Second Great Awakening, right? When people got saved and it led to anti-slavery and women's rights and so forth. And that's good. That's important.
Is this the era of the benevolent empire?
Exactly.
Where we're starting a million different crusades to wrong everything?
I wrote a book on the American Bible Society, which was forged during this period. Now, the other side of that is all of these today, you want to call them left-leaning evangelicals who are interested in social justice, also were ardent nationalists. So when William Lloyd Garrison wanted to burn the flag because there was slavery in the Constitution, right? Slavery was permitted. I mean, he was burning the flag because he wanted to make America a more Christian nation. Right?
Who could imagine that today?
Or Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was an evangelical, right, was trying to make America more moral through social activism and justice, right? So there is this kind of vision of the nation, right? And you also have the beginning in that period of kind of this providentialism, this idea that God has uniquely blessed us and so forth. So that's an interesting. That you also see a lot of nativism during that time. Evangelicals are leading the charge on stopping Irish immigrants from coming in because they're Catholics, right? So it's a really complicated time in American history. But I think this emphasis, you see Nathan Hatch, the famous historian Nathan Hatch, unpacked this in his book, The Democratization of American Christianity. It's a pretty easy read, academic book, but an easy read for lay people who want to dive into that. And what he argued was in the early 19th century with the Second Great Awakening, you see this erosion of Calvinism of the 18th century. And you see a much more individualistic form of religion as Methodists and Baptists and other free will evangelicals emerge during this time. And what happens is that evangelical individualism, the free will, right, is the same thing that's happening in the nation as we move for the first time in the age of Andrew Jackson, to a more individualistic kind of Democrat, universal manhood suffrage kicks in, right? So now you can accept or reject the gospel, right? It's not just the providence of God. It's like you will be saved. It's like I always tell the story about the Calvinist, right? He's walking in the woods. He falls into a pit, hits his head on a rock at the bottom of the pit, and is unconscious at the bottom of the pit. He can't call out to God for help, right? God comes in and saves him, revives him, right? Brings a ladder, climbs down the ladder, puts the guy over his shoulder, carries him up to the dry land or even level, and saves him, as opposed to like the individualist Arminian view, which has so informed like Billy Graham revivalism and Billy Sunday. And, it's like you fall in the pit and you're down at the bottom of the pit yelling, help me, get me out of here, right? God comes with a ladder, puts it down there and tells you to climb up it. And you could decide, no, I like it down here, right? I'm not going to climb. I'm not going to climb up the ladder. I like it in the bottom of the pit. So I think that individualism, you have a choice whether to climb up the ladder. You have a choice whether to who you're going to vote for the first time. You have politicians actually appealing to those votes. I think you see this convergence there. So that's John, a little long-winded, but yeah.
Whether speaking from your own historical point of view or for Hatch and what he wrote, which led which? Was it the revivalism of the Second Great Awakening that awakened a populism and an individual freedom in American culture, or was it already there, and there was this widening sense of individual freedom in American culture that then gave fuel to the Second Great Awakening and its theological framework of more Arminian revivalism?
And I'm sure that's something that all historians agree on.
Right.
No, it's the chicken or the egg thing.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with geography. I mean, the Cane Ridge revivals and the different like camp meetings, they all occurred in these remote backcountry places like Kentucky and so forth, where there was this kind of rugged individualism, to survive out there. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. They both, whether or not they even inform one another, I don't know. I think they're just kind of happening at the same time, and historians have noticed the kind of trend.
And regarding Phil's video again, what aspect of it do you think is most on target? Not that any of it is off target, but which pieces of the video, if you recall, do you think are for the moment we're in right now that you think contemporary Christians really need to reflect on because it's shaped so much of where we are as a church?
I think the most important part of the video is towards the end when Phil shows how the word evangelical and the evangelical movement got hijacked by the Christian right. I think that explains everything, and not only explains sort of semantically why evangelicalism today is often associated with politics or with an identity group, right? I mean, evangelicalism has become a kind of political lobby, right? When you think about it, it's like the NRA, the Christian right, the Planned Parenthood, these kinds of things. But also the way in which that era of the 80s is so interesting. It's hard to label because Falwell and the moral majority came out of, as you point out, Phil, in the video, that kind of independent Baptist fundamentalism. Jerry Falwell was a disciple of probably the most popular fundamentalist in America, John R. Rice, who wrote a weekly newspaper called The Sword of the Lord, which had like hundreds of thousands of subscribers, right? He came from that anti-Billy Graham, anti-polit, what did he have? That infamous, I should say, statement about the civil rights movement, right? Where we reject it, and so forth. And so I think there's a lot of that fundamentalism that you see in this response to critical race theory and systemic racism, right? There's some connections there. But then Falwell never fully, because he comes out of that fundamentalist background, he's never completely embraced by the kind of National Association of Evangelicals Billy Graham wing, right? I mean, Bob Jones and all these other people reject him for getting involved in politics. And then you have Billy Graham always kind of kept the arm's length away from him. He never joined the Liberty University never joined the CCCU, Coalition for Christian Universities. But yet, go ahead.
How important is the one person that I wanted to mention but didn't have time to was James Dobson. And I'm, looking at the 80s and the 90s and how evangelical middle America was transformed into a political identity. How big of a role did James Dobson play in that? And is that something we should be talking about more?
Well, I think if you had my friend Kristen Kobes-Dumais on here, and I think you have, haven't you?
Yeah.
She would say Dobson is absolutely central to everything, right? Because he shaped, not necessarily even the political. Dobson doesn't really get political until, a little bit later. But in sort of shaping sort of Christian family visions of manhood and womanhood, all of that kind of stuff. When Dobson kind of takes this turn towards politics, I think he might, that's interesting. I'm thinking out loud here, but Dobson came out of that more traditional evangelical world, right?
He did.
And he might be
from California. He was from California. Yeah. He was educated. He had a doctorate in psychology. Yeah. He just wanted to help families be healthier.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a Southern accent, which I think I believe the fact that James Dobson did not have a Southern accent is responsible for Southern fundamentalism taking over America.
he might be the linchpin that kind of, just thinking out loud here, you scholars who are listening to this, I'm just riffing, don't get on Twitter and, tell me I'm wrong, but he might be the linchpin between that links that evangelical movement with the Falwell. Him and Francis Schaeffer, I think, are the two key players, I think, in that.
Yeah. Would you throw C. Everett Koop in there for an assist?
Maybe. I mean, I look at Koop as kind of an extension of Schaeffer. They both were kind of buddies, and yeah.
I think it's interesting to track, the use of abortion as a political tool, and C. Everett Koop and Francis Schaeffer's, whatever happened to the human race. When that book hit, at the same time that Dobson and Weyrich were trying to figure out how to get conservative Christians to become political conservatives as a reliable voting bloc. I think that is a fascinating little ball of yarn to untangle, which I'd love to make into a video at some point, but I just have a feeling it would make people firebomb my house.
Well, it's true. I mean, I've never completely bought into the Randall Balmer thesis that it was all that, race.
Yeah.
I think race is important. I think Randy's right. I think Weyrich, whatever, I mean, it's all based on something Weyrich said to him at a meeting, right? I mean, and I'm not doubting Randall. He's a friend of mine. I believe him, but I like to see this more as a kind of perfect storm, right? Of race, of immigration, right? The 1965 Hart-Celler Act, where non-Western, of abortion, of even the bicentennial, 1976, right? Everybody's thinking, what is America? I like to see it as a much more perfect storm than just kind of, we got him on the race card. There you go. It was all about race. I think it was much more complex.
You've got to go back to Phyllis Schlafly and the Eagle Forum, which predates the moral majority and had nothing to do with race. It was everything about gender. And and you're going to take away gendered bathrooms, which that came back 30 years later in a way that we never predicted. So I think we all want to oversimplify things to say, either it's all about race, or it's all about gender and the patriarchy, or it's all about, and we do a disservice when the real situation is more complex than that, because my grandparents, completely moved towards the Republican Party. My grandpa had a Christmas card from Ronald Reagan that was signed and up on his wall in his office for the rest of his life, after the 80s. And that was motivated by just my knowledge of them feeling like the country was morally going downhill.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there were little racist tinges in some of that because the composition of neighborhoods was changing, which seemed to bring more crime. But there was way more than that. It was way more than that. And women's libbers, that was a pejorative. Way before, Democrats was a pejorative, or even liberals was a pejorative. Women's libbers was the first put down of the people who were coming to, and then communists, women's libbers and communists.
You could even trace this back to, Jerry Falwell was still fighting, in the 70s. He's still, his most immediate reference point now these things were happening, abortion and so forth. But he was also thinking about, prayer being taken out of public schools in 1962, Bible reading in 63. There was, and people like David Barton who have kind of chronicled this from the Christian right perspective. You can't see my air quotes, but Christian right history, air quotes. They do point to the long-term. 1947, New Jersey, Everson versus Board of Education in New Jersey, when Justice Hugo Black said there's a wall of separation between church and state, and it's quote unquote high and impregnable, right? And then that case was applied to the Bible and prayer cases in the early 60s. There is this narrative, if you're looking for it, of a kind of cultural decline, the decline of a kind of Christian nation as understood by mostly white Christians.
But what gets me about it, though, is it's hard to deny some of the facts that they lay out. Indeed, there has been a lot of cultural and moral change in America, but then they resort to this sort of magical thinking that if we just get prayer back in school, everything will be great. Or if we just elect a Republican, everything will be great. Or they admit that there's these complicated forces that have made America what it's become, good, bad, ugly, whatever you think. But then they offer these outrageously simplistic solutions that not only contradict any logic, but they contradict good biblical ethics.
But it's because we're scared.
Right.
We don't like what's happening, and we want to feel some. If only we could do X, then things would be better.
Exactly.
Then things would be better, and that just opens the door for 1,000 charlatans to say, "I know what X is. I can solve your equation."
So, perfect segue to our final question, John. It's your turn to be the charlatan and to offer a magical solution. You are the white evangelical pope of America for 2021, and everyone has to do exactly what you say. What would you tell the American church to do in order to right this ship, in order to begin to correct what you think has gone off course? What do we do in the next 12 months?
I don't know. I can't think of just one thing, Skye, but I'll stick with what I've already written. Take a civil rights bus tour. Get on a bus. There's many of them out there. Some even by really thoughtful Christians, evangelical Christians, African-American Christians. And spend a week on a bus, which I did, traveling to the civil rights sites and talking to veterans of the civil rights movement. What you'll see there is people who were scared to death that they were going to get beaten to death and trusted God, not to fear. Right. They trusted God and they could have acted in fear, and they didn't. They acted with hope. Certainly they had no opportunity to pursue political power. Right. I mean, they were outside of all possibilities of political power. But when they did get access to power, they spoke truth to it. Take King going to Martin Luther King going into CLBJ or Kennedy. Right. And I think what you would learn if you immersed yourself in that history, too, is that the African-American community during the civil rights movement, at least the early part of the civil rights movement, had a really pretty strong knowledge of American history. Right. They weren't what nostalgia could they turn to? What golden era were they going to go back to? Right. But instead, they understood. I mean, you read a letter from a Birmingham jail. King is citing Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. He's citing, of course, the same guy who they want to tear his monument down, right? He's citing Thomas Jefferson. He's citing the Declaration of Independence, and he's saying, like, be consistent, right?
But that's a tradition as old as Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
That's a tradition as old as Frederick Douglass, even older, of African-American leaders appealing to America's founding fathers and documents and basically saying, live up to the promise you made.
I just finished David Blight's excellent biography of Frederick Douglass. I recommend it to anyone.
I've been reading it too.
And what is amazing to me is just what you said, Skye, right? It's not only just an appeal to the American founding, but it's an appeal to biblical faith.
That's right.
I am blown away. Blight's coming to speak at Messiah, and I can't wait in the spring of next year. But to see the way in which Blight unpacked, like no other biographer Frederick Douglass has before, the deeply prophetic religion that drove his life. No historian has done as good a job at that as David Blight in his bio. So I recommend that. You want to be inspired, you want to read something positive for a change, read that biography. But I think you're right. Yeah. And I think that's what I would do. I mean, that I went with my wife and my, at the time, my, I think she was in middle school, my daughter. And it changed the way I thought about all of these questions. And I obviously learned a lot about African-American history that I didn't know and so forth. And it was fun meeting Ralph Abernathy's wife and talking with her, all these veterans that I met on the tour. But Messiah College sends 15 staff and faculty members, everybody from like cooks to faculty every year on this trip. But it also made me think there's a lot of time sitting in a bus. To thinking through this stuff. You can't go anywhere. There's no Wi-Fi in the bus, right? And you need to think, you start to think through, like, what does this not only mean for African-American history, but what can we white evangelicals or even Americans, right, learn from these stories? So yeah, that would be off the top of my head what I would try to.
Well, that's better than what I expected. Thank you. That's a great idea.
How big a bus can we get, and can it fit the entire evangelical church?
I feel that there needs to be a Holy Post podcast. You know how like Robert Jeffress takes people to Israel? A Holy Post podcast. I could set you up with the guy.
Let's do it.
Todd Allen. Yeah, he'd do it too. He'd do it.
I might be asking you for that contact, because I think that sounds like a really cool idea, especially when COVID is over and we can actually congregate again.
Yeah.
John, last question from me. Do you still refer to yourself as an evangelical? And if so, why?
Yeah, great question. I think I stay pretty consistent from the beginning. Yes. And I think because evangelical to me, I want to reclaim that word.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take that word away from the pundits. I want to take that word away from the politicians and the media, and it's the good news, right? It's the gospel. I'd be lying if I said that there's days when I think I'm going to have to give it up, but as long as I continue to embrace the gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ, I'll continue to use the term to describe myself. And even if I have to give like the 5-minute caveat speech, like it's worth it to me.
All right. Well, everyone who's listening, pick up, if you haven't yet, I don't know why you wouldn't have by now, but pick up John's book, Believe Me, if you want a historically rooted understanding of where the white church is in America right now, why it supported Trump so aggressively. You're great on Twitter and on your blog, John. I go there frequently to find out what it is that's got your attention and explaining politically and culturally what's going on. So thank you for the perspective and the historical context. That's why you are the official Holy Post historian.
And if you're curious, he talks about the Evangelical Road to Trump, his book, on episode 308 of the Holy Post podcast. Then he was back again on episode 354 to talk about identity politics on Holy Post. And then he was back again on episode 366 to talk about the secret evangelical Illuminati.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was fun. So yeah, you've been a regular, and it's nice to start 2021 with you. So
I'm honored.
I'm sure it's not the last time you'll be with us, and I love the idea of the bus tour. So we'll definitely kind of pick your brain about that some more.
If more history keeps happening, we'll keep calling you.
That's right.
Right.
And we might be putting you on the tagline of more of our videos as we try to do more historical context in those things. But
so that I can say, hey, it wasn't me. That was a historian who said that.
That's right.
Hey, I love what you guys do. I wish I listened to more episodes than I have, but the highest praise happened when I walked into my office, and we have a little area where our undergraduate work study for the history department works, and she bounced up off of her desk and said, whatever one of those episodes you mentioned, Phil, I just heard you on the Holy Post podcast. Oh my God. I'm like, I've taught you in 3 classes. I've tried to be an intellectual. But all I get is that I was on the Holy Post podcast. Right?
Yeah, now you've arrived.
Thanks, guys.
John, it's always a delight having you. Thank you for your laughter and perspective. It's just a hoot. Don't forget to check out Phil's video on the history of evangelicalism and fundamentalism. It's up on YouTube. It's up on holypost.com.
And all the parts of that video you love were my ideas. All the parts you hate, I think they were John's ideas.
Totally. They were all John. And then
I've taken enough heat for this Believe Me book. It doesn't matter anymore. Blame me for whatever you want.
You can continue to support great interviews like this one with John by going to holypost.com and hitting the support button. You can join our Patreon support team where you get all kinds of bonus material, extra interviews, merchandise, access to our live streams where you can ask us questions. Phil, anything else we need to say before we go?
I don't think so. Thanks for your support, guys, and welcome to a new year, the Holy Post. We're going to have a whole lot of fun, and as we watch certain subgroups of the evangelical world kind of go into self-enforced exile, perhaps, as they've lost the access to the power that they loved, it's going to be an interesting year.
And we've already got some incredible guests lined up that you will be seeing in the weeks to come, so stay tuned. Thanks for joining us.
All right, guys. Bye. The Holy Post podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Skye Pilot Media, that's Skye's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.